Okay, so we are going to do a quick sketch note with this one. This particular section has a lot in it. There's some things that I want you to consider. I'm going to be stopping it occasionally to talk about those things, but the main concept that I want you to go into the sketchnoting with is the idea of how we construct knowledge. When we think about the ways that we understand what wisdom is and the difference between wisdom and knowledge and the difference between knowledge and intellect and curiosity and all of those things, the way that we know what is true and what is real, those ways can be manipulated if you're in a dystopia. So when you're in a dystopia, and I'll give you guys a quick little rundown of dystopian, what dystopian literature is in the Padlet column there, and it'll say like, this is what dystopian literature is. But one of the big factors of being in a dystopia is that everything is predicated on sameness. If we create dystopias because we're trying to make a utopia. In a utopia, everything has to be the same because utopia means the perfect world. And if everything's perfect, one thing that is imperfect ruins the perfect world, right? That's the whole problem with a utopia. So in our pursuit of creating a utopia, we accidentally, or in some cases, some people think on purpose, created dystopia. So when something starts to fragment off of the whole, if you're in a dystopia, that fragmentation causes you to question everything that you ever knew, right? And when we started this whole thing by having a conversation about Plato's allegory of the cave, you're going to hear a direct reference to the cave in this particular part. At one point in time, Clarisse is talking about what the teenagers in her time period do, and she basically says that no one talks to anyone. They're all talking like as though they are in a cave, and all they talk about is nothing at all, right? So it's kind of like when we think about Plato's allegory of the cave, those two guys that were sitting there inside the cave looking at the cave walls, they're having a conversation about what's on the cave walls, but it's not really about anything, right? So we're going to see that today in today's sketch note. So hang on, let me share my screen. And I'm just going to be doing this one as one big box. So you are welcome to join me in that. Okay. And remember, there's always the links to you watching these on your own. You don't have to sketch note with me if you don't want to. Okay, so like I said, this is just one big box for me. That's how I'm going to do mine. And actually, let me pull this up so that I have my, go. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go a little over. Montag was trying to convince Montag and Mildred were having a conversation for breakfast. Montag was trying to convince Mildred that she had attempted suicide, and she was basically like, I wouldn't do that. Why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to pick up, this for me is on page 17. On page 17. Okay, here we go. Heck, she said, what would I want to go and do a silly thing like that? I don't know, he said. She was quite obviously waiting for him to go on. I didn't do that, she said. Never in a billion years. All right, if you say so, he said. That's what the lady said. She turned back to her script. What's on this afternoon? That's tiredly. She didn't look up from the script again. Well, this play comes on the wall-to-wall circuit in 10 minutes. They mailed me my part this morning. I sent them some box tips. They write the script with one part missing. It's a new idea. The homemaker, that's me, is the missing part. When it comes time for the missing line, they all look at me out of the three walls and I say the lines. Here, for instance, the man says, what do you think of this whole idea, Helen? And he looks at me sitting here center stage, see? And I say, she paused and ran her finger over a line of script. I think that's fine. And then they go on with the play and he says, do you agree to that, Helen? And I say, I sure do. Isn't that fun, guy? He stood in the hall looking at her. It's sure fun, she said. What's the play about? I just told you. There are these people named Bob and Ruth and Helen. It's really fun. It'll be even more fun when we can afford to have the fourth wall installed. How long do you figure before we can save up and get the fourth wall torn out and a fourth wall TV put in? It's only $2,000. That's 1/3 of my yearly pay. It's only $2,000, she replied. And I should think you'd consider me sometimes. If we had a fourth wall,
Why, it'd be just like the room wasn't ours at all, but all kinds of exotic people's rooms. We could do without a few things. We're already doing without a few things to pay for the third roll. It was only put in 2 months ago, remember? Is that all it was? She sat looking at him for a long moment. "Hmm. Well, goodbye, dear." "Goodbye," he said. He stopped and turned around. "Does it have a happy ending?" "I haven't read that far." He walked over, read the last page, nodded, folded the script and handed it back to her. He walked out of the house and into the rain. The rain was thinning away, and the girl was walking in the center of the sidewalk with her head up and the few drops falling on her face. She smiled when she saw Montag. "Hello." He said hello and then said, "What are you up to now?" "I'm still crazy." "The rain feels good. I love to walk in it." "I don't think I'd like that." "We might if you tried." "I never have." She licked her lips. "Rain even tastes good." "What do you do? Go around trying everything once?" he asked. "Sometimes twice." She looked at him. She looked at something in her hand. "What have you got there?" he said. "I guess it's the last of the dandelions this year. I didn't think I'd find one on the lawns this late. Have you ever heard of rubbing it under your chin? Look." She touched her chin with the flower, laughing. "Why?" "If it rubs off, it means I'm in love." "Has it?" He could hardly do anything else but look. "Well, you're yellow under there." "Fine, let's try you now." "It won't work for me." "Here." Before he could move, she had put the dandelion under his chin. He drew back and she laughed. "Hold still." She peered under his chin and frowned. "Well," he said. "Oh, what a shame," she said. "You're not in love with anyone." "Yes, I am." "Doesn't show." "I'm very much in love." He tried to conjure up a face to fit the words, but there was no face. "I am." "Oh, oh, please don't look that way." "It's that dandelion," he said. "You used it all up on yourself, and that's why it won't work for me." "Oh,
Oh, so I'm going to stop it for just a second. So, a couple of things. One, we hear Mildred basically explain what the parlor walls are. And I've used the reference before talking about the parlor walls kind of being like virtual reality, but it's even less than that. So it's not even virtual reality because in virtual reality, you could like interact with other people, but that's not even what Mildred is doing. She's essentially just like saying a script and then responding to it. And like the way that I can relate this to gaming is if you've ever played a PC game, like if you've ever been like or in like some cases it could be like a console game, but it's like it's one of those games where it's like you are in charge of like choosing certain lines and like that's what you do. And again, even with that, that's not even really what it is, right? So she basically is just like given this script that she's supposed to be in charge of, and then she says the lines, and she wants to be in this world that is a non-reality, right? And so, she keeps saying, "Oh, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't kill myself. I wouldn't do that." And yet she's not really participating in life either. So is that really living? I mean, all she's obsessed with is she wants to live in this virtual world that's not even a real world where there is no free will. There's no free will. She's just told what to say and what to do, and she never questions it. She doesn't even know what the ending is, and she's happy there. She is happy in that little cave. Her cave is a cave of 3 walls, and she wants that cave to be so completely encompassing that it's 4 walls. And I will tell you, if you've ever met anyone who is addicted to video games, this is what it's like. They prefer the game life to real life. Real life is boring and slow and not as interesting and not as easy to attain like success. And so I'm going to go into this virtual world where I can get things, and when I get things, I get prizes for them. So that's one understanding of like what is happiness and what is relationship. And now we have this moment in which Clarisse is basically standing out in the opposite of the cave that Mildred is in. She's got her face up to the sky and rain is pouring on her face. And we hear the first exploration of Montag understanding a new way to gain knowledge. So this, if you want like a philosophical term, is epistemological knowledge. Like it is, I am questioning the way that we understand the world around us This is gaining knowledge through experience. Do you just go around trying everything once? Sometimes twice. That is a form of getting knowledge. Montag might never have known what dew is on the grass unless Clarisse asked him to do it, right? Montag might never have asked himself if he were happy unless Clarisse asked him to have that experience of questioning. And now he's questioning. And now we have this little scene with the dandelion rub, right? And like, scientifically speaking, sure, probably that whole thing, like she used up all the dandelion and that's what it was. But you hear him again experiencing, maybe for the first time, what it means to question, are you really in love? Are you really in love with Mildred? And he has a moment in which he defends himself and he goes, yes, I do. I do love my wife, but he can't picture her face. He can't recall what her face looks like. That's how shallow their relationship is. His relationship with his wife is so shallow that when he says, of course I'm in love, he can't remember what her face looks like.
Of course, that must be it. Oh, no, I've upset you. I can see I have. I'm sorry. I really am. She touched his elbow. No, no. I said, I'm all right. I've got to be going. So say you forgive me, and I don't want you to be angry with me. I'm not angry. Upset. Yeah. I've got to go see my psychiatrist now. They make me go. I make up things to say. I don't know what he thinks of me. He says I'm a regular onion. I keep him busy peeling away the layers. I'm inclined to believe you need a psychiatrist, said Montag. You don't mean that. He took a breath and let it out, and at last said, no, I don't mean that. The psychiatrist wants to know why I go out and hike around in the forests and watch the birds and collect the butterflies. I'll show you my collection someday. Good. They want to know what I do with all my time, and I tell them that sometimes I just sit and think, but I won't tell them what. I've got them running. And sometimes I tell them I'd just like to put my head back like this and let the rain fall in my mouth. It tastes like wine. Have you ever tried it? No. You have forgiven me, haven't you? Yes. He thought about it. Yes, I have. God knows why. You're peculiar. You are aggravating, and yet you're easy to forgive. You say you're 17. Well, I mean, next month I'll be 17. How odd, how strange. And my wife, 30, and yet you seem so much older at times. I can't get over it. You're peculiar yourself, Mr. Montag. Sometimes I even forget you're a fireman. Now, may I make you angry again? Go ahead. How did it start? How did you get into it? How did you pick your work? And how do you happen to think to take the job you got? You're not like the others. I've seen a few, I know. When I talk, you look at me. When I said something about the moon, you looked at the moon last night. The others would never do that. The others would walk off and leave me talking, threaten me. No one has time anymore for anyone else. You're one of the few who put up with me. That's why I think it's so strange you're a fireman. It just doesn't seem a right fit for you somehow. He felt his body divide itself into a hotness and a coldness, a softness and a hardness, a trembling and a not trembling, the two halves grinding one upon the other. You better run off to your appointment, he said. And she ran off and left him standing there in the rain. Only after a long time did he move, and then very slowly, as he walked, he tilted his head back in the rain for just a few moments and opened his mouth.
Okay, so now we have Montag becoming the new Montag, right? So that he has this separation from himself. His body is doing a series of paradoxes. And if you have your book open right now, you can actually see, it is, yeah, so it's on page 21. And it says that it divided into itself a hotness, a coldness, a softness, a hardness, a trembling, and a not trembling. So those are all literary paradoxes, and it's supposed to represent the idea of like knowledge itself is kind of slippery, right? When you know something, you know it on such a level that you recognize all of the contrasts that exist, and it's okay for your mind to accept those contrasts, right? So if you've ever felt hot and cold at the same time, then you know that paradoxes exist, and that's okay, right? If you've ever felt like really, really soft and vulnerable emotionally, but your body kind of goes rigid and hard, that's also a paradox. And that's what he experiences. And it's a moment of enlightenment for him, right? So he's coming out of the cave, he's having this moment of enlightenment. And that moment of enlightenment includes the fact that, like, he is in a state of flux right now. The mechanical hound slept but did not sleep, lived but did not live, in its gently humming, gently vibrating, softly illuminated kennel back in the dark corner of the firehouse. The dim light of 1 in the morning, the moonlight from the open sky framed through the great window touched here and there on the brass and copper and steel of the faintly trembling beast. Light flickered on bits of ruby glass and on the sensitive capillary hairs and the nylon brush nostrils of the creature that quivered gently, gently, its 8 legs spidered under it in rubber-padded paws. Montag slid down the brass pole. He went out to look at the city, and the clouds had cleared away completely, and he lit a cigarette and came back to bend down and look at the hound. It was like a great bee come home from some field where the honey is full of poison wildness, of insanity and nightmare, its body crammed with that over-rich nectar, and now it was sleeping the evil out of itself. "Hello," whispered Montag, fascinated as always with the dead beast, the living beast. Nights when things got dull, which was every night, the men slid down the brass poles and set the ticking combinations of the olfactors. Really quickly, this is a trigger warning. There is about to be animal death. It is of rats. System of the hound, and let loose rats in the firehouse areaway, and sometimes chickens and sometimes cats that would have to be drowned anyway. And there would be betting to see which of the cats or chickens or rats the hound would seize first. The animals returned loose. 3 seconds later, the game was done. The rat, cat, or chicken caught half across the areaway, gripped in gentling paws, while a 4-inch hollow steel needle plunged down from the proboscis of the hound to inject the massive jolts of morphine or procaine. The pawn was then tossed in the incinerator. A new game began. Montag stayed upstairs most nights when this went on. There had been a time or two years ago when he had bet with the best of them and lost a week's salary and faced Mildred's insane anger, which showed itself in the veins and blotches. But now he lay in his bunk, face turned to the wall, listening to the whoops of laughter below, and the piano string scurry of rat feet, the violin squeaking of mice, and the great shadowing motion silence of the hound leaping out like a moth in the raw light, finding, holding its victim, inserting needle and going back to its kennel to die as if the switch had been turned. Montag touched the muzzle. The hound growled. Montag jumped back. The hound half rose in its kennel and looked at him with a green-blue neon light flickering in its suddenly activated eye. It growled again, a strange, rasping combination of electrical sizzle, a frying sound, a scraping of metal, a turning of cogs that seemed rusty and ancient with suspicion. "No, no, boy," said Montag, his heart pounding. He saw the silver needle extend upon the air an inch, pull back, extend, pull back. The growl simmered in the beast, and it looked at him. Montag backed up. The hound took a step from its kennel. Montag grabbed the brass pole with one hand. The pole, reacting, slid upward and took him through the ceiling quietly. He stepped off in the half-lit deck of the upper level. He was trembling, his face was green-white. Below, the hound had sunk back down into its 8 incredible insect legs, and was humming to itself again, its multifaceted eyes at peace. Montag stood, letting the fears pass by the drop pole. Behind him, 4 men at the card table, under a green-lidded light in the corner, glanced briefly, but said nothing. Only the man with the captain's hat and the sign of the phoenix on his hat,
Sorry, only the man with the captain's hat and the sign of the phoenix on his hat, at last, curious, his playing cards in a thin hand, talked across the long room. Montag, it doesn't like me, said Montag. What, the hound? The captain studied his cards. Come off it. It doesn't like or dislike, it just functions. It's like a lesson in ballistics. It has a trajectory we decide on for it, it follows through, it targets itself, homes itself, and cuts off. It's only copper wire storage, batteries, and electricity. Montag swallowed. Its calculators can be set at any combination, so many amino acids, so much sulfur and so much butterfat and alkaline, right? Yeah, we all know that. All of those chemical balances and percentages on all of us here in this house are recorded in the master file downstairs. It would be easy for someone to set up a partial combination on the hound's memory, a touch of amino acids, perhaps. That would account for what the animal just did now, reacted towards me. Hell, said the captain. Irritated, but not completely angry, just enough memory to set up in it by someone so it growled when I touched it. Huh, who would do a thing like that? Asked the captain. You haven't any enemies here, guy. None that I know of. We'll have the hound checked by our technicians tomorrow. This isn't the first time it's threatened me, said Montag. Last month it happened twice. We'll fix it up, don't worry. Montag did not move, and only stood thinking of the ventilator grill in the hall at home, and what lay hidden behind the grill. If someone here in the firehouse knew about the ventilator, then mightn't they tell Hound? The captain came over to the drop hole and gave Montag a questioning glance. I, I was just figuring, said Montag, what does the hound think about down there at night? Is it coming alive on us? Really? It makes me cold. It doesn't think anything we don't want it to think. That's sad, said Montag quietly, because all we put into it is hunting and finding and killing.
So he's talking about programming the hound, and Montag is wondering if the hound has some sort of consciousness. So this is the questioning of like, what is consciousness? And if you've ever asked yourself, what would happen if AI gained consciousness? That's essentially the idea that Ray Bradbury is exploring here, right? If we do have mechanical things, and those mechanical things are used only for war, and they only know hunting and they only know killing, if they did ever glean some sort of consciousness, that could be very dangerous for us, right? And it's also kind of sad that that's all we've really given it knowledge of.
What a shame if that's all it can ever know, Beatty snorted gently. Hell, it's a fine bit of craftsmanship, a good rifle that can fetch its own target and guarantees the bullseye every time. That's why, said Montag, I wouldn't want to be its next victim. Why? You guilty? You got a guilty conscience about something? Montag glanced up swiftly. Beatty stood there, looking at him steadily with his eyes, while his mouth opened and began to laugh very softly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and as many times he came out of the house and Clarisse was there somewhere in the world. Once he saw her shaking a walnut tree. Once he saw her sitting on the lawn knitting a blue sweater. 3 or 4 times he found a bouquet of late flowers on his porch, or a handful of chestnuts in a little sack, or some autumn leaves neatly pinned to a sheet of white paper and thumb-tacked to his door. Every day Clarisse walked him to the corner. One day it was raining, the next it was clear, and the day after that the wind blew strong, and the day after that it was mild and calm, and the day after that calm day was like a day like the furnace of the summer, and Clarisse with her face all sunburnt in the late afternoon. Why is it, he said one time at the subway entrance, I feel like I've known you so many years? Because I like you, she said, and I don't want anything from you, and because we know each other. You make me feel very old and very much like a father. Now you explain, she said. Why haven't you any daughters like me if you love children so much? I don't know. You're joking. I mean, he stopped and looked at his head. Well, my wife, she just never wanted any children at all. The girl stopped smiling. I'm sorry. I really thought you were having fun at my expense. I'm a fool. No, he said. It was a good question. It's been a long time since anyone cared enough to ask. A good question. Oh, let's talk about something else. Have you ever smelled old leaves? Yeah, don't they smell like cinnamon? Here, smell. Why, yes, it is like cinnamon in a way. She looked at him with her clear, dark eyes. You always seem so shocked. It's just, I haven't had time. Did you look at the stretched out billboards like I told you? I think so. Oh, yes. He had to laugh. Your laugh sounds so much nicer than it did. Does it? Much more relaxed. He felt at ease and comfortable. Why aren't you in school? I see you every day wandering around. Oh, they don't miss me, she said. I'm antisocial. They say I don't mix. It's so strange. I'm very social indeed. It all depends on what you mean by social, doesn't it? Social to me means talking to you about things like this. She rattled some chestnuts that had fallen off the tree in the front yard. We're talking about how strange the world is. Being with people is nice, but I don't think it's social to get a bunch of people together and then not let them talk, do you? An hour of TV class, an hour of basketball or baseball or running, another hour of transcription history or painting pictures and more sports. But do you know we never ask questions? Or at least,
So she's talking about the education system in this dystopia. Basically, she's saying that they go from class to class to class. The classes don't have class discussions. All they do is sit around and receive information. And the information that they're getting is like through television, or just like they're just like flooding them with information, or they're playing sports, right? And it's not them actually, like the students don't talk to each other. And so when he's like, why aren't you in school? She's like, they don't really want me there. Like, I just cause trouble. I do weird things like ask questions. They don't like that.
most don't. They just run the answers at you, bing, 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 bing. And us just sitting there for 4 more hours. Film teacher. That's not social to me at all. It's a lot of funnels and a lot of water poured down the spout and out the bottom, and then them telling us it's wine when it's not. They run us so ragged, by the end of the day, we can't do anything but go to our bed, head for a fun park to bully people around, or break window panes in the window smasher place, or wreck cars in the car wrecker place with a big steel ball, or go out into the cars and race them on the streets trying to see how close you can get to lampposts playing chicken and not hubcaps. I guess I'm everything they say I am, all right. I haven't any friends. That's supposed to prove that I'm abnormal. But everyone I know is either shouting or dancing around like wild, beating up at one another. Do you notice how many people hurt each other nowadays? You sound very old. Sometimes I'm ancient. I'm afraid of children my own age. They kill each other. Did it always used to be this way? My uncle says no. 6 of my friends have been shot in the last year alone. 10 of them died in car wrecks. I'm afraid of them, and they don't like me because I'm afraid. My uncle says his grandfather remembered when children didn't kill each other. That was a long time ago, when they did things different. They believed in responsibility. Says, do you know I'm responsible? I was spanked when I needed it years ago, and I do all the shopping and house cleaning by hand. But most of all, she said, I like to watch people. Sometimes I ride the subway all day and look at them and listen to them. I just want to figure out who they are and what they want and where they're going. Sometimes I even go to the fun parks and ride the jet cars when they race on the edge of town at midnight, and the police don't care as long as they're insured. As long as everyone has 10,000 insurance, everyone's happy. And sometimes I sneak around and I listen in the subways, or I listen in soda fountains. And you know what? What? People don't talk about anything. Oh, come on, they must. No, not anything. They name a lot of cars or clothes or swimming pools mostly, and they say, how swell. But they all say the same things, and nobody says anything different from anyone else. And most of the time in the caves, they just have the joke boxes on. And the same jokes most of the time, with a musical wall lit and all the colored patterns running up and down, but it's only color and it's all abstract. And at the museums, have you
Okay, so I'm going to stop it before she kind of goes off on this tangent. So she just referenced the caves. She's literally talking about Plato's allegory of the cave. Like this is an allusion to Plato's allegory of the cave, where she basically says people my own age don't have real conversations about anything anymore. All they talk about is essentially what she describes as memes. All they talk about is memes. And it's the same joke over and over again in just different flavors, right? And they don't talk about anything. They just talk about all of the TV shows that they watch, or the ways that they're violent towards one another. They don't have conversations like, are you happy and are you in love? Like they just talk about nothing, and they say things like, oh swell. They talk about the brands they're going to buy. They talk about, they have vapid conversations. And again, that's Plato's allegory of the cave. So she's basically saying, I'm enlightened and it's lonely. And Montag is starting to understand that, like, the idea of being the enlightened person, it's a lonely position for Clarisse, because she's not like the other kids. She's antisocial. She's abnormal. So we listen to Clarisse talk and she sounds like a little bit flighty. Yeah, but she sounds like a normal person in an abnormal world. And that's how Socrates felt. And remember, Socrates was Plato's teacher. Socrates felt as though he was someone who only he admitted that he knew nothing. And like his whole method of teaching was basically to have conversations with people and ask questions. That's the basics of the Socratic method, not to produce answers, just to produce questions. And Clarisse just explained that basically she spends like 4 to 6 hours every day in a classroom, and which she's just given the answers, answer after answer. And she says they just flow it past you, bing, 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 right? Answer after answer after answer, but there's nothing about questions. No one is curious. No one's asking questions. And what is Montag doing now? Because Clarisse is teaching him to do it, she's asking questions. So Clarisse is very much like Socrates. Like she's very much like, let's question the world around us and let's be aware that things aren't the way that we thought they were. And that's exactly what Plato's allegory of the cave is, right? Plato wrote this down because Socrates had a conversation with a student, and which basically Socrates was like, well, Glaucon, what do you think? Like, do you think that you could possibly live in a world in which everything that you think that you know is true is actually just like an unenlightened state? Maybe there's something more. And that's what Clarisse is doing for Montag. Do you think, Montag, that maybe your world of being a fireman isn't so great? Do you think maybe you're not really a happy person? Maybe you're not really in love like the way that you thought you were? I'm just asking questions, right? That's all she's doing.
It's all abstract. That's all there is now. My uncle says it was different once, a long time back. Sometimes pictures said things or even showed people. Your uncle said, your uncle must be a remarkable man. He is. He certainly is. Well, I gotta be going. Goodbye, Mr. Montag. Goodbye. Goodbye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. A firehouse. Montag, you shin that pole like a bird of a tree. 3rd day. Montag, I see you came in the back door this time. That hound bother you? No. No. 4th day. Montag, a funny thing. Heard tell this morning firemen in Seattle purposefully set a mechanical hound to his own chemical complex and let it loose. What kind of a suicide would you call that? 5, 6, 7 days. And then Clarisse was gone. He didn't know what there was about that afternoon, but it was not seeing her somewhere in the world. The lawn was empty, the trees empty, the street empty, and while at first he did not even know he missed her or was even looking for her, the fact was that by the time he reached the subway, there were these vague stirrings of disease, dis-ease in him. Something was the matter. His routine had been disturbed, a simple routine, true, established in a short few days, and yet he almost turned back to make the walk again, to give her time to appear. He was certain if he tried the same route, everything would work out fine. But it was late, and the arrival of his train put a stop to his plan. A flutter of cards, motion of hands, eyelids, the drone of the time voice in the firehouse ceiling. 1:35, Thursday morning, November 5th. 1:36. 1:37 a.m. the tick of the playing cards on the greasy tabletop. All the sounds came to Montag. Behind his closed eyes, behind the barrier he had momentarily erected, he could feel the firehouse full of glitter and shine and silence, of brass colors, the colors of coins, of gold, of silver. The unseen men across the table were sighing on their cards, waiting. 1:45, the boy's clock mourned out the cold hour of the cold morning of a still colder year. What's wrong, Montag? Montag opened his eyes. A radio hummed somewhere. War may be declared any hour. The country stands ready to defend its. The firehouse trembled as a great flight of jet planes whistled a single note across the black morning sky. Montag blinked. Beatty was looking at him as if he were a museum statue. At any moment, Beatty might rise and walk about him, touching, exploring his guilt and self-consciousness. Guilt. What guilt was that? Your play, Montag. Montag looked at these men whose faces were sunburnt by 1,000 real and 10,000 imaginary fires, whose work flushed their cheeks and fevered their eyes. These men who looked steadily into their platinum igniter flames as they lit their eternally burning black pipes. They and their charcoal hair and their soup-colored brows and their bluish ash-smeared cheeks, with their heads shaven close but their heritage showed. Montag started up, his mouth opened. Had he ever seen a fireman that didn't have black hair, black brows, a fiery face, and a blue steel shaved but unshaved look? These men were all mirror images of himself. Were all firemen picked then for their looks as well as their proclivities? The color of cinders and ash about them, and the continual smell of burning from their pipes? Captain Beatty there rising in the thunderheads of tobacco smoke, Beatty opening a fresh tobacco packet, crumbling the cellophane into a sound of fire. All right, I'm going to stop it there. We're a little.
Okay, so we went a little over the regular reading, but I thought it was important, a good place to stop, because next week we're going to get into a really deep read of an important scene. So the main thing that I want you to take away is that Montag is kind of questioning the way that we glean knowledge, right? The fact that Clarisse is understanding the world around her in this very experience-focused way, as opposed to just receiving information passively, the way that her peers seem to. And it seems as though they are not really even interested in whatever is happening in school, right? Because what do? They're so exhausted by the time they get home, they just kind of numb themselves, right? And so now he's like, everything that I thought was what it was is different. And so he's not only questioning that, at the very end, he starts to question his own identity. He sees these three men that are mirror images of himself, and they are kind of like the epitome of what a fireman is supposed to look like. And they all look the same way. They all have burnt faces, and they have darkened features, and they have a little bit of scruff on their face, and they all look that way. And he's like, did they target us so that we were hired this way? Or do we just happen to drift towards this particular type of work because of our genetic makeup? And so he's questioning the whole world around him. And we heard that one part where he's still thinking about what's behind the ventilator grill, right? And the fact that he thinks about what's behind the ventilator grill when his captain is scrutinizing him, and the mechanical hound is sniffing him out and growling at him, that should lend some question that should give you some hints. Go ahead and infer what Bradbury is implying, what is behind the ventilator grill, right? So clearly, even before this whole thing with Clarisse, and she says that to him, she's like, you're different than the other firemen, right? So before he met Clarisse, clearly there was something that he had been questioning. So going back to the Socratic method, once you start questioning, that's when real knowledge actually begins. And you decide the only thing I know is that I know nothing, right? Okay, we'll stop it there, and then we'll pick up next.